the sweetest memory.
There you go. It is February 19th, 2018. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, and no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people. We look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe, CKWE in Tandanega. You can find us at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are streaming live on Facebook, video on Facebook. We post the shows afterwards, both on Facebook and on SoundCloud, so the audio can be caught after the fact, or the video can be caught after the fact. I am John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer, and I welcome you to the program. I got a couple of things I want to get into as I've promoted this show. I've said, look, we're going to look at some solutions going forward. But I do want to address one thing that I mentioned on my last show. I referenced a case because I was talking about how their systems out there, how the systems of the state and the federal government, how they are systems of oppression and how they do not work for us, and why we need to find alternative ways to address that. And that's going to be part of what the show is about. But I mentioned a case, and the case is it's actually an insurance company, Hanover Insurance, versus one party, and then the third party is a party that's here on the Native Territory. Happens to be one of my show sponsors, ERW. Now, the case is kind of basically simple. You know, ERW is a construction company. They are hired to do a number of things, not the least of which is to transport equipment, sometimes service equipment and the like. And ERW was contracted to pick up a number of pieces of construction equipment, service some of them, and then await payment. And so that's what ERW did. Well, apparently the equipment that they picked up also had an insurance bond against them by this Hanover Insurance Company. And on one hand, ERW is waiting to get paid for what they were contracted to do. And at the same time, the insurance company is trying to lay claim to this equipment. Now, ERW is a Seneca Nation company. It is a company that is licensed by the Seneca Nation. It operates on the Seneca Nation territories. It does a lot of its work with the Seneca Nation. In fact, the company that contracted with ERW is a non-native company, but has done a lot of work on Seneca territory in various places. Everything from gaming to paving driveways, any number of things that they've been involved. The individual who owns the company has done a lot of work with, for, and on the Seneca territory. So, again, no reason to believe that for ERW to believe that they would not get paid, but they didn't, and so they filed essentially a lien or a hold on the equipment pending their payment. And now this other company, Hanover Insurance, took it to a very friendly court, if you're a white company, a friendly court in Rochester, Monroe County, got this case heard in front of a New York State Supreme Court Justice, Matthew Rosenbaum, who completely dismisses the Seneca Nation courts and has ordered that ERW hand over this equipment. And the problem is that it's already tied up in the Seneca Nation court. They actually ordered the police departments, including the county sheriffs, to assist in this. And of course, the police departments have refused. They said, no, we only do these kinds of things with the permission of the Seneca Nation. So there's a conflict there. But the interesting thing, and it relates to what I have talked about how those systems, and how even when we mirror their systems, those systems fail us. Now, ERW, by all accounts, did what they were supposed to do. They used their court system to secure the protection for payment. That's what they did. And this judge in Rochester, in Monroe County, is basically saying, no, that court can't do that. And he cites this this judge cites some state law, and the state law is basically, I mean, it's essentially a law that when you read it, um, it's chapter 46, peacemakers courts. It literally is a state law, essentially, saying how the peacemakers courts are supposed to work. Peacemakers courts for each of the three territories, Allegheny, Cattaraugus, and Tonawanda reservations, shall respectively constitute their peacemakers court thereof, and the eldest peacemaker of each court of the courts shall be the presiding officer. I mean, it's literally, this is a state law trying to direct how peacemakers court. Look, that's not the way things work. Maybe they did in the 1950s or before that, I don't know. But this judge citing this outdated state structure of how the state thinks that the Seneca courts should be structured. I mean, there have been federal rulings and everything else that acknowledge the sovereignty. I mean, obviously, the Seneca courts have played an ever-increasing role in everything from the rather sophisticated contracts that the Senecas have been involved in any number of things, but all kinds of things. Look, and I'm not sitting here trying to suggest that I'm a great fan of that system, even the Seneca Nation system. But for this judge to be so dismissive, he cites a section of this chapter 46 law that says they shall not take cognizance of any claim founded upon any debt or demand originally contracted with a non-Indian. So in other words, yeah, those courts are fine for Indians, but you can't use those courts for white people. I mean, and this goes in keeping with this notion that even to the extent that the state or the federal government, or any subdivision of that, in county or otherwise, is forced to recognize some elements of self-determination, what these courts invariably do is say, we are the superior sovereigns. So even when you throw a word like sovereignty out there, they want to make it clear that there's a inferiority-superiority relationship between natives and non-natives. And it couldn't be any more clear than with this case. And and I'm gonna again follow this thing a little bit more closely and get into some of the details of this thing. But know that there's a judge in Rochester, Matthew Rosenbaum, who, as far as I'm concerned, is a white supremacist. And again, his improper reading of state and federal law by picking out sections of law that are outdated is, that'd be like looking for pre-slavery laws that may still be on the books. I mean, that's how absurd this is. But this kind of goes to what I was speaking of, on the last program, and frankly we'll continue to speak about, which is how that system does not work, and how we are always going to be treated in an inferior fashion in their court systems, and even when we mirror their systems and create licensing or courts or any kind of governing structures, that they're still going to look down at whatever we do. Matthew Rosenbaum is making it very clear that is his predisposition here. And so I'm only wanted to kind of just touch that. I didn't want to hang out with this thing for too long in this program, because I feel like after the last program I talked a lot about why we have to untangle ourselves from that system. There's a quote that I use all the time, and it's not a native quote, but let me read it for you again. It says, "The task of an activist is not to navigate the systems of oppressive power with as much personal integrity as possible. It is to dismantle those systems." Now, when we talk about Native people, I'm not an activist fighting to improve the American system. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm a Native activist. I'm a person trying to untangle ourselves from those systems of oppression. Look, if Americans want those systems, and you can hear the split, every day in this, battle, pro and against, for and against Donald Trump and others. There are people who love some of those systems of oppression. And then there are people that are fighting it. Well, until the people who are fighting it are really willing to step up. I'm with you. I'm with you to some extent, but not my system, not my state, not my president, not my governor, not my country. I'm native. I'm Ongwe. I happen to live in the territory of the Onondaga. I mean, that's who I am. But I'm not a New Yorker. I'm not an American. I'm Ongwe. And and that's really kind of the identity that is required of us. And when I do the opening for this show, and I talk about, um, we look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Look, it's all of those things. We do have to take a tough look at what has been the relationship between the United States and Native people, and in fact, all people of color. I mean, we have to look at all of that. We have to assess where we're at now, and we have to prepare ourselves for the future. So, part of what I began to talk about last program was what was wrong currently and why the system currently doesn't work. But what I want to talk a little bit about today is solutions. Look, and I'm not gonna whip out a bunch of magic bullets. I'm gonna talk some basic stuff, and I'm not talking about revolt or revolution. I talk about the changes that every one of us has the power to make. Every one of us, because we all have a certain level of power within our own sphere. In fact, we refer to it, we call it our sphere of influence. So when we ask that question, where do we go from here? Knowing what we know, knowing, that racism is alive and well in America and in Canada. We see it with Colton Bushy, and we see it in we see it in the battles that Colin Kaepernick and Black Lives Matter are involved in. We see it in the injustice that goes on with the environmental degradation with things like the Dakota Access Pipeline and so many. I mean, look, I can go through a whole nother program of all the things that are wrong, but I want to talk about going forward. So here goes, and here's the starting place, and we could argue the starting place always starts with self, right? But really, beyond that, the starting place is your family. I mean, we have to really devote ourselves to our family. Yeah, and as a parent, the one you really need to devote yourself, hey, as a young guy, you devote yourself to your wife. If you're a young woman, you devote yourself to your husband. But the moment you start having children, some of that priority changes in your life. And now you are at that moment, you have a role in the future of your family, your people, your legacy, everything. You have now created essentially your afterlife. You've begun that chain. The moment you have a child, and I would argue the moment you teach a child, the moment you interact with somebody younger than you, and begin to plant the seeds that other generations will carry. So even beyond the idea of childbirth, but the moment you start influencing children, you have created a legacy for the future, good or bad, good or bad. So it does. It starts with family. It starts with your own children, how you raise them. And look, I know the rat race, and in fact, that's an expression that is very old. I don't know if is everybody familiar with the term rat race? Rat race is that whole idea of, that you're like on that treadmill, or the hamster wheel, just running and running and going nowhere. That you're doing whatever you can do to stay alive. You're fighting the system and trying to keep your head above water. These are all analogies, right? These are all metaphors. But that's where we've gotten ourselves to, and there's no real getting ahead. Yeah, there's the exception to the rule, the guy who strikes it rich somehow. I mean, in native territories, some people made millions of dollars in cigarettes. But by and large, the vast majority of native people are living below the poverty line or at the poverty line. I mean, even in Seneca territory here, I think The last numbers I saw had 30% of the population of Seneca territory living below the poverty line. And this is a pretty good economy by comparison. You go into other territories, and it gets far, far worse. It gets far worse. So how do we devote our time to our families if we're doing what we can and struggling with what we can do to bring in enough money to put food on the table, to, have a house and a car to get us to work and all of those things? I mean, this is part of that challenge. So when I say we've got to reconnect, we've got to know our children. It means we got to invest that time. Look, I know we get them up in the morning, we put, Frosted Flakes in their bowl, and we send them off to school. And somebody else raises them. Look, it is what it is. I did the same thing. But when you do have the time, even if you can't divorce yourself from that system, what do you do with the time that you do have with your children? Look, we've got to recommit ourselves to our children. We've got to educate them. Look, not every one of us are educators in the sense of, of that word where people think of it as being a teacher. But we all teach. I mean, we teach ourselves. We learn things every day, so we teach things every day. And we have to play a bigger role in that. We cannot sacrifice all of the time with our children to something else, whether that is, working our asses off, whether it's, self-medicating ourselves, whether it's seeking our own entertainment and, and letting, Xbox or MTV or cable television or somebody else raise our children for us. So I look, this may sound overly simplistic, but it's not. It is what's necessary. And I say it's necessary because things are not going well in the United States and Canada. And things are not going well. I don't care how many times Jefferson Keel or Brian Clattersby or any one of these other native guys in great suits stands up in front of a microphone in front of a national audience and tell you how great the state of Indian nations are. It ain't great, folks. It isn't. It just isn't. Now, having said that, I think there is a buzz. I think there are people that have a sense for where we should be, even if we're not there. And where did that sense came from? It came out of the 70s. I mean, we've had, almost 50 years, but certainly 40 years of a renaissance, if you will, in thought about what sovereignty means. Now, unfortunately, tribal government hasn't caught on to any of this or much of this. A little bit, but not much of it. But we need to rethink the road that we're on. And it starts with family. It starts by, for one thing, we can talk about the clan system, and we can talk about consensus building and all those things, the Guyana or Goa. We can talk about all those things, and we should. But if we aren't prepared to use principles of that Guyana or Goa, that great law, what people call the great law, in our own families, then how do we expect to impose it or recommend it or suggest it to anybody else? So we need to learn how to counsel. You need to have family meetings. And look, I'm not saying that we need to create, institutionalize our family. I'm not saying that. We need to be human beings. Human beings, which is just another order of creation, right? Not something that defies nature, but something that, when you look at every other element of creation, only man seems to defy it with almost everything that we do. So we need to reconnect with our families. And, so when you reconnect with your families, then you find yourself reconnecting not just with your kids, but their friends. And then perhaps the parents of those friends. We need to start with the family and then look into our immediate community around us, the neighborhood. And we need to do some things together. Among those things we should do is care for each other. Now I know there's probably some folks saying, man, I thought this guy was going to offer some suggestions and some solutions. These are the solutions. I don't care how basic they sound. These are the solutions. We need to be human beings. We need to have a future forever. We need to be a people forever. Which means that we have to shed some of that those oppressive systems that have been bogging us down. And we need to do some of the most basic things that we have neglected. Connect with our children. Connect with the people immediately around us. Do some things as a family and as a community. Let it grow. I mean, it can be slow. I mean, and look, this may start with simple things like looking. I mean, I know people can think of, okay, neighborhood watch. Well, let's go a little bit more than that. I'm not saying let's create neighborhood policing agencies. I'm saying let's care about each other. I mean, let's care about the basics. Your dog getting into your neighbor's garbage. Well, do something about it. Don't cause a rift over some of these silly things. Or if you see a child that seems, somehow that got neglected or abused. I mean, let's not just launch into an immediate judgment and punishment and be vindictive about it, but let's help the child first. I mean, let's find out what we can do to help the family that's created a situation where a child is in neglect. We can criticize each other or we can help each other. Now, I know this sounds, just, this guy thinks he's Mother Teresa now or something. No, look, we have to rethink who we are. And this idea of keeping up with the Joneses and trying to make sure we have as many ATVs and 4x4s and Cadillacs in each other's driveway. I mean, look, maybe what we need to do is find out whether our neighbor needs a ride someplace. I mean, we can look after each other a little bit more, and then we can do some things together. Build a playground, build a garden, do the kinds of things. I always, the one thing when my children were younger, I liked being the household that the other kids came to, whether it's because we had a basketball hoop out in the driveway, or we had some space in the house that the kids felt like they could congregate. Hey, it didn't always go well. Trust me, I kicked a few boys in the pants who overstayed that welcome with alcohol or whatever else and that kind of stuff. I went through that. But in general, I would rather be the household that other kids came to than wonder where my kids were when they left the house. So we need this is such a basic thing. I know what I'm saying sounds almost trite. And you think, well, these aren't the good solutions. Look, in a perfect world, I'd say let's homeschool our kids. Let's stop sending them to public school. Let's eliminate every connection we have with the institutions that have been designed to promote racism and disparity. But I know that's not going to happen. So let's take the steps. Look, if you're going to keep your kids in public school, then maybe you need to spend some time to find out what they learned that day, especially when they get into things like social sciences and that kind of stuff, global studies. I mean, don't let your kid get contaminated with this view that truth, justice, and the American way is, the United States is angelic, and that the American dream is what, I mean, look, you got to address that stuff. You got to tell the truth about certain things in American history, especially the truth as it relates to us. We don't even revisit that. We barely spend the time with our kids to talk about what the trails of tears were. And I said trails of tears because there wasn't just one. We haven't talked to our kids about the travesty that was 100 years of residential schools. And they sure as hell aren't going to teach that stuff in school, in public school. But even beyond our own history, we haven't explained to our kids, the United States is the only country in the world that has used a nuclear weapon as a weapon of mass destruction. And used it, not just built it. I mean, they built it. The United States started the whole nuclear arms race, and they used 2 of them to kill innocent people. And when they dropped those 2 atomic bombs on Japan, they didn't need to. They dropped those atomic bombs in August of 1945. In March of that same year, they had already blasted the hell out of Japan with some of the largest aerial incendiary, fire bombs the world has ever seen, and them and their coalition partners. You ever wonder why did those nuclear bombs, why did those atomic bombs get dropped on Tokyo? Because Tokyo was already leveled 6 months earlier. Now, our kids aren't being taught this stuff. No kids are being taught this stuff. But certainly our kids should be taught this so they understand. You want to talk about global studies? Then let's teach real global studies. So look, if your kids are going to be in those schools, then there's a certain level of deprogramming that we have to engage them with. And you know what? Maybe we deprogram their friends too. Now, some people would take absolute offense to that. And I'm not just talking about their native friends. Their non-native friends need to know some of this stuff. Because you know what? The world that we're living in is going to require this next generation, all of this next generation, to do some major things. Things that our generation, hey, we did some things, but we didn't do enough. We didn't accomplish, in my lifetime, I'm starting to stare 60 years old in the face pretty quick. I'm going to be 59 years old this year. Yeah, at the very end of this year, but I'm going to be 59 years old this year. I thought I'd have accomplished more. And I don't mean my accomplishment. I thought the people that I worked with for the last 30 and 40 years, I thought would be farther ahead. And I don't mean financially. So we've got work to do. And some of that work we have to do is about preparing our youth. That's where we go from here. Look, we're at the bottom of the hour. I'll take a break. When I come back, I got more on this that we definitely need to talk about. And talk about how it relates to some current issues that are happening right now in the United States. And where we fit in that. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
Razor wire cut you to the bone, son. It can make meanest long for home, and it's a crying shame. Just yourself to blame. And every morning when the sun comes up, you stand in your cage like a little pup. You wait for the man to turn the key. You step outside to greet. I raise a wife. It's a crying shame. Late at night when all the killers are down, teardrops splashing on that concrete ground. It's a dangerous game. They cry for their own pain. A razor wire pain. Watch it gleam on that sunny day, tempting you to try beyond your way. You try to swagger like you don't care, but you're always under that wire's glare. A razor wire, it's a scary game. A razor wire's game.
Say hello, and thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I want to take, first off, let me acknowledge the music that we've played thus far. I opened up with Hometown Hero. And that song by Darkwater Rising, Charlie Lowry and company, that song is about losing a young person who had so much to contribute. And we see that happening, whether we lose them in a car accident or, look, we've lost young people to missing and murdered Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous men, suicides, drug abuse, all kinds of things. So we need to take the opportunity to allow these young people to be those heroes that they could be. And that's kind of, so I want to acknowledge that song. And of course, then we did a real favorite of mine, Razor Wire by John McLeod. So I want to acknowledge those two songs. But I also want to acknowledge the show's sponsors, Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, who I mentioned in this case on this very show. My friends Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice. Neville Spring. Look, I got to give Neville Spring a special acknowledgement because today's his birthday, 78 years old. A happy birthday to Neville Spring. By the way, it's also my daughter-in-law's birthday, Stephanie Kane. So she's not 78, but she has cracked into a new decade of her life. She's 30 years old. So I want to wish a happy birthday to Steph and to Neville. Look, I also want to acknowledge another good friend of mine who really does a lot to help support what I do here, and that's Sugar Montour. But I also want to thank others who have helped in the past, even if they aren't now. I mean, even if they haven't in quite some time. We are in our 8th year here. We couldn't be in our 8th year of Let's Talk Native if I didn't have a number of people along the way who have helped out in very big ways, and some far away. I've had guys like Harry Wallace down with the Ungachugs help me do some help with some aspects of what I do here. I've had folks up in Akwesasne support the program, and of course a bunch of different people here in Seneca Territory who have helped in the past. And I want to thank all of you for helping me to continue to educate, entertain, and inform for over 7 years. And I want to thank you all for doing your part and joining in the fight. So I also want to acknowledge and thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming, as well as thank CKWE again for both their simulcasts and the rebroadcasts, and some of the other networks out there, Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio. I want to thank all of you for carrying Let's Talk Native on your networks. I also want to thank my wife and others. There's many of you now on Facebook who share the Facebook Live videos, but some of you are starting to really step up and share the SoundCloud audios, and when we post the YouTube videos of the shows, you guys have been sharing those too. So I want to thank all of you. We kind of cracked a bit of a milestone with our YouTube channel, and so we're launching a new URL specifically to our channel. So I'm hoping it'll drive more people to subscribe. And the YouTube videos are really the best quality video of the programs. They're not live, but they are the best quality videos. So if you go to Let's Talk Native TV, that's our YouTube channel. I would encourage you to subscribe and be a part of that group as well. Look, I talking about empowering our youth. One of the things that goes along with empowering our youth also has to do with, and this may sound, I don't know, counterintuitive, I guess, but properly burying our dead. Because one of the things that we are guilty of, and we see this across many societies, many cultures, and in many ways, people who perpetuate hatred generation after generation after generation. That's why racism is allowed to fester this many years, into the history of the United States, for racism to be as prevalent and prominent as it is. That's generation after generation teaching hate. I was recently involved in a bit of a conversation on Facebook with a Native person who, his father just passed away, and he, went on Facebook to raise issues and draw a bunch of attention to the passing of his father, but then took it upon himself to just reiterate all of the hateful things that his father did during his lifetime, and spreading a bunch of lies and gossip and rumors, and it would have been just as well for everybody to just acknowledge the passing, offer their I don't know, their thoughts. I mean, their condolences, I guess, and let some of that hatred die. But instead, you've got a son that's perpetuating so many of the hateful, so much of that hateful misinformation. We need to empower our young people to make decisions on their own, not to carry the hatred that some of us may still have, or the biases. Maybe it's not outright hatred. Some of it is, carrying the pain of an injury that we sustained, whether it was an injury associated with physical injury or an injustice. But we don't need to saddle our kids with all of that. In fact, in order for us to hope for more from our children, we've got to allow them to make some decisions, some decisions that we may not even support, at least not that we don't think we support. And a case in point isn't even a Native issue. This latest shooting in Florida, there are young people stepping up, and they're making some noise, and they're saying, look, we're not going to allow people to continue to run for office and win these office seats, especially the Republicans on the right, when they refuse to enact reasonable gun laws. Yeah, background checks. I saw somebody post, that kid who shot those 17 children had 20 or 30 police calls on him. He was suspended and expelled from schools. He lived with adopted parents, and he was a troubled kid. And in the attempt to say all this stuff, they're trying to say, see, it wasn't the gun the gun wasn't at fault. The fact that he used an assault rifle and was able to touch off a bunch of rounds real quickly and mow down 17 kids. They want to defend the gun and say, see, it's all on the individual. Well, or that it's mental health or something like that. Well, the problem is the NRA has been spending millions of dollars with every election cycle to make sure that there is no reasonable gun laws put in place, no background checks. So when a guy like this kid, and I don't want to use his name, troubled kid, gets pushed to the breaking point. Yeah, he can walk into a Walmart and buy an AR-15 or wherever he bought it from. I don't know. I don't want to pick on Walmart, but I know Walmart sells 223 ammo. But young people, so the high schoolers, are stepping up even where their parents perhaps didn't. Now, I'm not saying that this is a shift right or left. It's a shift from wrong to right. Not a political direction, but a righteousness, a rightness direction. Look, Americans have fetishes with guns. There's no question about it. They have a fetish with guns. And young people are saying, no, that's not acceptable anymore. Look, you guys want to go hunt ducks or whatever, that's fine. But the fact that, that a reasonable thinking person is unwilling to push for safer gun laws. So you see, young people are stepping up on this stuff, in spite of what the parents may have thought. Now, look, if you lost a child at Newtown or or sitting in a church in Alabama or wherever, or a school in Florida, if you lost a child, Columbine, then I would hope that you would change your view on how important it is that people continue their love affairs with gun ownership and start reassessing some of that. But even if you're not, it does look like the kids are. So we can go through some history. The anti-war movement, it wasn't an adult battle. It was college kids. It was kids in college that were doing that stuff. And younger than that, some. So that's youth empowerment. I'm not just talking about empowering a 12-year-old. I mean youth empowerment in general. And by empowerment, I don't mean put an AR-15 in the hands of a 19-year-old either. That's not the power I'm talking about. But we've seen it in their society. What about ours? For all of the criticism that anybody wants to talk about with the quote-unquote warrior society, as I sit beside my unity flag, dubbed the warrior flag, that started as a youth movement. It was young men who wanted to practice songs and do some singing, put a bit of a singing society together. That's where that was born out of. It was more of a youth movement. It wasn't like AIM. AIM were older guys who saw our people being abused in cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and some of these urban areas that Native people were being lured into through government programs on their relocation policies and that kind of stuff. But that's not where the warrior societies were born out of. They were born out of young people who were looking to be more engaged in solving some of the problems they saw in their communities. That was a youth movement. Unfortunately, we all got old, but it didn't start out that way. It started with young people. So what is the next answer? I mean, what is the next thing that young people are going to do? You know what? We may not know. But we should talk with them. We should engage our young people. We should empower them. And, let them make some mistakes. But again, we don't, I'm not saying, we convince them to become armed militias. But maybe be active. Maybe travel. Maybe see other native territories. We need to do some things that are going to empower our youth, because they're going to have to pick up and make some decisions, maybe some tough decisions that we were afraid to. Maybe that's the generation that says, no, I'm not putting my kids in public school anymore. Maybe it's our kids who make that decision with their kids, with our grandchildren. Maybe it's our great-grandchildren. Whatever that decision is, we've got to start empowering. For me, my kids are adults now. So now it's about, how do I empower my grandkids to do some things that perhaps I was negligent in empowering my own kids, their parents with. I mean, we're all culpable. We're all responsible for what we didn't do and for what we did do, right? So I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm just saying, going forward, this has to be part of the solution. We have to know how to build coalitions and how to do consensus building. But that has to be born out of doing some things, not just praying for them. I'm not looking to grab a bunch of young people and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But perhaps grabbing a bunch of young people to do something like, I don't know, plant, harvest, do ceremonies, teach, build something, empower our young people to be more involved in looking after younger ones than them, child care, senior care, building tiny homes. That's a project that I'm trying to get involved in right now with. Creating homes, creating communities. We need to rethink what we're doing for employment today. We do. Our generation, the working generation, right? Do we really want to sacrifice 40, 50, 60 hours? Two parents sacrificing 40, 50, 60 hours a week? Or should we find a different lifestyle or a change in our lifestyle that allows us to take more of that time and invest in our children and in our children's future? And maybe some of that future is about empowering them for what is going to be the economy that they run. Look, we all know how to go out and get a job. Whether we do it or not, we all know how to do that. We know how to panhandle. We know how to, we know how to go look for a nation job or a casino job or whatever it is. We know how to run cigarettes. We know how to do, our generation has done a bunch of those things, right? But have we dedicated ourselves to building a sustainable economy? One that isn't based on the bottom line, 6 figures, 7 figures, but one that says, okay, here's the balance of revenue generation and quality of life that we're seeking. Look, we've had generations that have gotten involved in the extractive industries. Hey, the Osage, they were the richest people on the planet in 1920. While white men were raping their mother. Some case raping their mothers, but raping their mother. Pulling out all the oil. The Osage were rich, but you know what? Those white people all got rich too. Where do you think Getty and Rockefeller and all these guys came from? Where do you think they came from? A lot of the money that these guys made, they made off of native territories. That's how they got rich. That's where, some of that oil industry, especially the domestic oil, came from. And it's still coming from native lands. Tar sands oil, Alberta, still coming from native lands. And then native lands are being exploited for their distribution. Keystone XL pipeline, Dakota Access pipeline, bomb trains running across our territories. But we got engaged in that. And when I listen to Brian Clattersby or Jefferson Keel talking about how great the state of Indian nations are, they're still talking about that stuff. What did Keel say? He said something like, investing in our infrastructure is investing in America's infrastructure. These guys, this is NCAI, they're totally ill-prepared for understanding that, no, our economy is our economy. Now, that's not to suggest that a good economy on native territories doesn't impact a region outside of our territories. Oh, certainly it does. But when I heard Brian Clattersby a few years ago during his State of Indian Nations address suggest that, I don't know, I don't remember what the number was, but it's something like 20% of the United States energy resources are on our lands. Then why the hell are they the United States energy resources? Why are you calling it their resources if they're on our lands? Why aren't they our energy resources? Why isn't the energy resources, and this is, this isn't even opposing the extractive, but even if you're in favor of the extractive industries, why aren't those energy resources 200%, 300%, 400% of our needs? Instead, no, it's 20% of the United States energy resources. Instead of it being 100% of our resources, or meeting, or exceeding our energy needs. That's how bad things have gotten in our generation. Our people talk about, thoughts and prayers and, honoring veterans and, who to vote for in the next national election. And what we need to be talking about is empowering our youth. That's what we need to. That's really what we need to talk about. We need to allow them to break the cycles of oppression that we didn't. And I'm not saying we didn't try, and I'm not saying we didn't accomplish some things. The word sovereignty is something that rolls off our tongues like it's a native word. Oftentimes that word has been grossly overused and abused. But the notion that we have the right and the power to make our own decisions, and of course, with that, we have the responsibility to make sure those decisions are followed through, and that we don't just assert rights, but we perform our responsibilities. Look, we don't even look at a chief or a tribal chairman or or whatever you want to call these, native leaders. We call them leaders. We don't call them servants. We say that we talk about raising up a chief as if we've lifted him above the rest of us. We talk about the authority of these people, the power of these people. We talk about the power of the two-party system of the United States, the power of the U.S. military. But we don't talk about the responsibility. The reality is, in our way, those people that we put into a position with a responsibility, they are not empowered. They are actually burdened. They are servants of the people, not lords and masters of them. So this is exactly the message that we have to teach our kids. And look, I know some people say, oh, you can't teach them that. Then they're going to be disrespectful. You know what? If we haven't earned their respect, then why should they respect us? And I'm not saying this to suck up to a bunch of angry young people. And I'm not an angry old person. But I'm not happy with our successes. I'm not content. I'm not satisfied with where we are. We have to do better. Our grandchildren are counting on us. 7 generations are counting on us. And the generations after them. Look, we've done some good work. We have. We've stood up. We still have a racist judge in Rochester who fails to recognize that we have any right to self-governance and to and essentially to assert ourselves on our own land, even in our dealings with non-native people. But more and more people understand it. More and more people recognize who we are. I mean, I grew up in a time. My father was a high steel worker. I grew up on the other side of the state, out past Albany. Only native kid in essentially an all-white school. We had a couple of exchange students, but we barely had a person of color in that school. I was it. Ironically, we were the Cambridge Indians. And I was the only quote-unquote Indian. Who knew? They barely did. They knew. But I was just one of them. So as we, looked at the gymnasium floor and saw, a Plains Indian headdress on a native, silhouette or a native profile, nobody thought or concerned whether it was right or wrong. We were invisible. I was invisible. At least my nativeness was invisible. I wasn't invisible. I was always kind of a brash young guy, outgoing. I stood out, but I didn't stand out. My standing out didn't raise any consciousness about acknowledging me as a native person. Shame on me for not doing more, I guess. But I do something with it now. But we've had generations of fellow students in public schools. We've had generations of parents of those kids and kids that became parents who still don't know how to address diversity. They throw the word out there. And then they throw a word out there like tolerance. We need to promote tolerance. You know what? I don't want to be tolerated. If you want to engage me, that's not tolerating me. If you want to engage me, you want to hear my thoughts and see my perspective, I understand it, then maybe we can have a respectful engagement, exchange. But I don't want to just be tolerated. Tolerated sounds like, I hate that guy, but I put up with him. I don't want to be put up with. I want people to understand. But more importantly, I want my kids to understand. And I want my grandkids to understand. So I asked the question, where do we go from here? We don't have to look far. We don't have to go to Albany. We don't have to go to Washington. We don't have to go to Standing Rock. We've got our kids right here. And even if you don't have kids, there's kids close by. We've got a battle over hydrofracking water being dumped in the Allegheny. We've got a battle over contamination from West Valley Nuclear Storage Facility contaminating the Cattaraugus Creek. We have a battle with the state of New York over them trying to take gaming revenue from the Seneca Nation's gaming facilities. We have a battle with the state of New York every single day with police who try to assert their jurisdiction on our territories. We have a battle with efforts on many of our territories from the Canadian side, even on the federal side, to treat us as just their municipalities, trying to just turn our territories into their municipalities. We've got a lot on our plate. The beauty is our survivability thus far has been based on us picking and choosing our battles. I don't think we picked and chose quite a few, or quite enough yet. But maybe the next generation will. Starts there. Starts real close by, starts with family. Look, I want to thank you guys for listening. I look forward to your comments and your questions, and we'll have more conversations as we go forward. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on Friday. Ciao.